MPSG's on-farm network began hosting trials in faba beans in 2020. So there have been 3 trial types and 5 on-farm trials in faba beans so far. 3 trials investigated foliar fungicide applications, 1 looked at seeding rates, and 1 trial investigated foliar insecticide applications. So it is a pretty small data set we'll talk about today for a smaller acre crop. In case you're not familiar with faba beans, there are on average about 7,000 acres grown in Manitoba each year. Last year, with the delayed spring, there was less than 500 acres seeded. Faba beans need to go in pretty early, often in the last week of April or first week of May, and we couldn't get on the field that earlier in 2022, so cropping plans changed. Faba beans, though, are excellent nitrogen fixers. They'll fix roughly 90% of their nitrogen requirement on average, and they're the most likely to leave behind an end credit for successive crops. They are well adapted to cool and moist growing conditions. They need plenty of water to succeed. They're quite upright and stand really well. And then depending on the variety, there'll be anywhere from 100 to 130 days to maturity. Agronomically speaking, they do share a lot of similarities with peas, with some exceptions. In terms of diseases that infect faba beans, we have early season root rots. They're not a host of Aphanomyces root rot either. And then we have several in-season foliar and stem diseases that might infect faba beans. These diseases can be quite difficult to distinguish visually in the field. The most yield-limiting disease, though, is chocolate spot, followed by Ascochyta and Staphylium blight. So these diseases will also often co-infect, which can be even more challenging to tell them apart in the field. In Saskatchewan, they did do an informal survey to identify and document the foliar diseases they were finding infecting faba beans, and they took those leaf samples and then submitted them to their crop protection lab. Staphylium blight and chocolate spot were found in 61% of those samples. It was the most common, or those two were the most common. And then Alternaria leaf spot was found in a third of samples, or 28% of the samples they submitted. Here in Manitoba, though, we haven't had any disease surveillance work in faba beans. So to say what we're seeing most often, we don't really have the data to back that up. So part of the reason why some of this disease work and fungicide trials are important. And that does bring us to our on-farm foliar fungicide trials in faba beans. With all of those foliar fungal diseases that can infect them, what are the agronomic and economic impacts of applying fungicides in faba beans? Will a fungicide application reduce foliar disease pressure? Chocolate spot's not actually on the label for a lot of products, so will that disease be reduced with a fungicide? Will fungicide improve yield and provide a return on investment? Those are some of the questions these trials are hoping to answer. So in 2020, we had 1 trial near Swan River in snowdrop faba beans evaluating a single application at full flower versus none. And then in 2021, there were 2 trials, 1 near Swan River and 1 near Russell. And they evaluated 1 application applied at early flower versus 2 applications, where there was 1 at early flower and a second at full flower. So both of those trials were in low tannin faba bean varieties, Navy and Snowbird, or Navy and Snowbird. So precipitation and moisture will, of course, play a role in determining how much disease pressure is going to develop. So here we've got the percent normal precipitation for June, July, and August for each of those 3 fungicide trials. So 1 trial here, 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 and then June, July, and August. The 2020 trial received 168% of normal July rainfall, while July rainfall in 2020 was anywhere from 44 to 60% of normal. And then they had in 2021 a bit more moisture in August with those trials. Full flower, when that fungicide application was applied in a lot of these trials, that was mid-July. So that July rainfall really is a key piece. And then diseases were evaluated visually in each strip, both for severity and incidence, or the percent of plants infected. So Ascochyta was rated on a 1 to 7 scale for both foliar and stem infections. And then chocolate spot was rated on a 0 to 5 scale. Starting with Ascochyta, incidence, or the percent of plants infected, they're on the left for each of the 3 trials. And the severity of the disease is on the right for each of those 3 trials. So in 2020, we were comparing no application to 1. 2020, no to 1. And then in 2021, it was 1 application on the left in the darker bars to 2 applications in the lighter color bars. And what we were seeing is that the percent of plants infected with Ascochyta, that was reduced with a fungicide application. and also with a second application in 2021. Severity of the disease on individual plants was also reduced with a fungicide application. The trend wasn't the same for chocolate spot. So again, we've got the percent of plants infected on the left, and then the severity of the disease on the right. So when we're comparing that single application versus none in 2020, chocolate spot incidence and severity were both reduced with a single application at full flower. When we compared one app to two apps in 2021, we don't see that same reduction in chocolate spot incidence or severity with that second application of a fungicide. But remember though, that July was a lot drier in 2021 than in 2020, where this trial had almost 170% normal rainfall in July. But what did that mean for yield? So the yield results for all three trials are on the right here. So in 2020, a single application at full flower improved faba bean yield by almost 16 bushels an acre compared to no application. If we assume a product cost of $14 an acre, a faba bean sell price of $7 to $9 a bushel, that provided a return on investment of $96 to $127 an acre. In 2021, on the other hand, there were no significant yield differences between a single application at early flower and two applications of fungicide. So really that timing of infection and July rainfall appear to be critical in determining if we'll see a yield response to fungicides in faba beans. Early infections will cause more damage. Research is suggesting that we should aim to protect the first 5 flowering nodes if disease is present to avoid yield loss. So fungicide applications should be made when those flowers are open on 2 to 4 nodes if disease is present on the lower leaves, and if those humid conditions that are great for disease development are persisting through July. Ultimately, though, we do need more faba bean research in Manitoba, especially in the realm of diseases, and so we'll continue to host these trials with interested farmers. Switching gears now, there's also been a single seeding rate trial in faba beans. The goal of this trial was to determine if we'd see any changes in yield with different faba bean seeding rates. Faba bean seed is also quite large, and it can be challenging to run through equipment, so that's playing around in the back of our minds too with these trials. So in 2020, near Swan River, one on-farm trial evaluated 3 different seeding rates for snowbird faba beans. So seeding rates tested were 228 pounds per acre, 284 pounds per acre, and 341 pounds per acre, which kind of translates to 230, 287, or 345,000 seeds per acre is what we're seeing that conversion here. So then plant stands were evaluated for each seeding rate around V5. And what we were seeing of the plant stands we were recording in the field when we went to take those counts was that the lowest seeding rate resulted on average in a plant stand of 155,000 plants per acre. The medium seeding rate resulted in lower plant stand of 128,000 plants per acre, and the highest seeding rate resulted in a plant stand of 212,000 plants per acre. So we're seeing kind of a medium, low, and then high from those different seeding rates established. But overall, plant establishment, the percent of seeds that put into the ground surviving to a living plant, it was quite low in this trial, and it did vary with the different seeding rates. What did those different plant stands mean for yield, though? There were no significant yield differences among the 3 different seeding rates and their resulting 3 different plant stands in this trial. Over the spread of about 85,000 plants per acre difference among these different plant stands, yield averaged anywhere from 53 to 56 bushels an acre. No real change. So this means we didn't really see that return on investment on the increased seed cost with the higher seeding rate. However, that was just one trial. I'm not going to recommend changing from our established plant stand recommendation at this time. So if you're growing faba beans, target a living plant stand of 180,000 live plants per acre, both to maximize yield and competitive ability of the crop. So when you are calculating those seeding rates, account for germination, expected survivability, and take into account your variety's seed size. Faba beans can have a pretty big range in seed size, anywhere from 300 to 600 grams per 1,000 seeds. So there can be a pretty big spread among varieties for what seeding rate will achieve that target plant stand. And then the last trial I want to talk about is investigating applications of foliar insecticide versus none later on in the season. Will that insecticide application reduce Lygus bug damage? Let's talk a little bit more about the why behind this trial, introduce a little bit of background information. So faba beans do mature later in the season. That means those Lygus bugs are moving into faba bean crops once alfalfa is cut or canola is swathed. And these Lygus bug adults and the nymphs, they'll pierce faba bean pods and they'll suck out plant sap. This leaves behind a really dark staining because the enzymes in their saliva are left behind, resulting in this dark perforated seed damage that we're seeing in the photo, these little dark spots. Yield loss isn't what we're concerned about here, but it does cause downgrading from loss of quality. So this is especially an issue for faba beans being marketed for human consumption, where those quality targets are a bit more strict. And then hot, dry weather is promoting Lygus bug development. So the growing season of 2021 was a great time for this trial. And let's talk about that trial more. So this on-farm trial compared a single application of Belief insecticide applied in late July versus untreated faba beans. So faba beans attract a lot of insect pollinators, and those pollinators improve yield. So it was important here to use an insecticide that wasn't as toxic to those pollinators. After harvest, what we did, we took seed samples taken from the different strips and evaluated them for perforated insect damage. That's what these little black dots on the seeds are called. So feeding damage was evaluated as either mild, picture on the left, where we've got 1 or 2 spots on the seed that are visible, 1 or 2 dots, and then we've got moderate to severe damage, where we've got these larger perforations, there's more of them per seed, and we're seeing quite a bit more damage. What were those quality results? So faba beans that were treated with a foliar insecticide had less damage than the untreated faba beans. That's what we're seeing here in this graph, this reduction. The amount of mildly damaged seeds didn't change, but the amount of seeds that were moderately to severely damaged were significantly reduced by about 10% with an insecticide application. However, that single insecticide application was also not enough to eliminate seed damage altogether. We're still seeing quite a bit of seed damage from Lygus bug. So what can we do for scouting and management? The suggested economic threshold from the research in Alberta is 5 Lygus bugs per 10 sweeps during the early pod stages to avoid downgrading. That being said, in their research as well, even with multiple insecticide applications, some Lygus bug damage will still occur. It wasn't ever eliminated entirely. And then in terms of management, start by seeding faba beans early. They tolerate those cool soils, they tolerate spring frosts. With that earlier seeding, we'll have hopefully more pods past that susceptible stage when Lygus bug numbers are peaking later in the summer. So those hot, dry conditions are favoring Lygus bugs. They're also the opposite of what are ideal conditions for faba beans. So timing that a little bit earlier, moving that crop ahead. Foliar insecticides will decrease the amount of damage, but it might not be a complete solution. And also keep in mind though, if you are going to spray, if you're past those economic thresholds, do try to limit the damage to those insect pollinators. Spray in the early morning or late evening and use those products that are less harmful, less toxic to pollinators. So if you're interested in learning more about these trial results, they're available on the On-Farm Network database page, available at manitobapulse.ca or by following this QR code. And if you're interested in participating in a trial, contact Ian, the On-Farm Network technical specialist. If you're interested in just learning more about faba beans as well, you can feel free to contact me. I'm Laura, the production specialist for Western Manitoba. And thanks for your time today. If you want to stay up to date on research results like these, do follow us on social media or visit our website. Thanks.